meeting of the Santa Barbara City Council on May 11th, 2023. Would join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. And Madam Clerk, would you call the roll, please?
Certainly. Councilmember Harmon, not yet present. Councilmember Friedman?
Here.
Councilmember Oscar Gutierrez, not yet present. Mayor Pro Tem Alejandro Gutierrez, not yet present. Councilmember Snedden?
Here.
Councilmember Jordan?
Here.
And Mayor Rouse.
Here. All right, very good. I'll open it up to public comment for items that are not on the agenda today. See no public comment. Do we have any? We're not doing online today, right, Madam Clerk?
Correct, Mr. Mayor.
All right, very good. And with that, we will move on to our agenda. Would you read the item, please?
Certainly, and that is council workshop to discuss ad hoc committee on homelessness findings and recommendations.
All right, very good. Ms. Anderson.
Good morning, Mr. Mayor and council members. I'm Barbara Anderson, Senior Assistant to the City Administrator, and I'm here in support of the Ad Hoc Committee on Homelessness as they report out their findings and recommendations from their concerted efforts to step into the complexities of the nationwide homelessness crisis.
All right, very good. Mr. Freeman, do you have, are we still doing a presentation? Or?
Yes, I'm
Okay.
going to move forward with just an overview. I was asked by the committee to touch on a couple of points in general, and then I will hand it over to Councilmember Friedman. So the ad hoc committee included council members Eric Friedman, Kristen Snedden, and Michael Jordan. It was supported by the city administrator, assistant city administrator, myself, and Elizabeth Stotts, our homelessness programs analyst. The committee objectives were to better understand current strategies to reduce homelessness, further research best practices, and identify areas for improvement. The committee also stepped into understanding funding streams, specifically in regard to how funding is prioritized and distributed at the state and local level. For a quick overview, we want to reiterate the recent point-in-time count totals in the city of Santa Barbara. It's important to note that the counts have decreased steadily since 2020. Earlier this year, the total count was 787, with a significant decrease among our unsheltered population and a notable increase among our sheltered population. This is due to partially by the dedicated work from our outreach teams and city staff to facilitate shelter referrals. We also want to highlight that our investments to address homelessness in the city of Santa Barbara have steadily increased over the last several years. Specifically of note is that last fiscal year, the council approved the emergency sheltering project at the Rose Garden Inn, which was the significant increase in grants for services from years prior. We anticipate the total for fiscal year 2023 will be an estimated $7.5 to $8 million due to the increased costs for city departments. The committee specifically requested that I also include the coordinated entry system and continuum of care in our overview this morning. Given the complexities and often misperceptions of these two key components of the system to address homelessness. Coordinated entry is a process designed to quickly identify, assess, refer, and connect individuals in crisis to housing and services. Coordinated entry is intended to prioritize resources for those with the greatest need, match people with services that are most likely to help them exit homelessness, reduce the time it takes for participants to access services, and ensure that resources are allocated efficiently. So again, all referrals are facilitated through the coordinated entry system for shelter and permanent housing in Santa Barbara County. The Federal Department of Housing and Urban Development typically provides over $2 billion per year in funding for homeless housing and services. This funding is distributed through the continuums of care, which are regional organizations that meet regularly to improve project performance and build community support for responding to homelessness. The continuum of care uses the Vulnerability Index score to help inform the type of housing intervention that is needed by a person experiencing homelessness. Scores range from 0 to 16, with 16 representing the greatest degree of vulnerability. So again, this is where the coordinated entry system and the COC align. In Santa Barbara County, there are currently 8 individuals identified with a score of 16, of which 4 are in the city of Santa Barbara. The majority of individuals are identified at a level of 5 to 8 on that vulnerability index. Lastly, as we transition to the report out from the committee, we wanted to highlight some of the strategies that we currently have deployed to help address homelessness and its impacts throughout the city of Santa Barbara. As I stepped into my new position in the city administrator's office and Ms. Stotts as the homeless programs analyst, it has been very important for us to deploy strategies that both assist our most vulnerable population and address concerns that we receive daily from residents and business owners. Our job is to address the needs of all of our residents, whether housed or unhoused, as well as to ensure the safety and vibrancy of all of our neighborhoods throughout the city. So our current strategies that we'd like to highlight include the Act on Homelessness Collaborative, which is now in its 3rd year of the 3-year strategic plan to reduce homelessness and its impacts in the city of Santa Barbara. The creation and replication of the neighborhood-based navigation centers, which are now at 3 locations, 3 different times per week. The recent shift in the contract with PATH from general operating support to city-designated interim housing beds that we now receive daily reports on. It also includes the expansion of outreach services to nights and weekends on the downtown corridor and the waterfront. This combined with the continuation of daytime outreach throughout the city. Since February, CityNet has facilitated 736 total outreach contacts with individuals, engaged 143 businesses, and facilitated 26 unduplicated shelter placements. Most notably, they've housed 5 unduplicated individuals. And on Tuesday, the council approved the new ordinance to regulate public storage for personal belongings in public spaces. This also includes additional storage solutions for our unhoused population. Now I will turn it over to Councilmember Friedman to begin the report out from the AdHOC Committee on Homelessness.
Thank you, Ms. Anderson. First, I want to thank my colleagues, Councilmember Steadden, Councilmember Jordan. We put a lot of time in over the last year. I met with, as we'll go through the presentation, a lot of different local individuals, agencies, as well as some from throughout the state and throughout the country to try to get an understanding of the complexities of homelessness and what some of the best practices are. I also want to thank Ms. Anderson and Ms. Stotts, who were the staff support for all of this and really walked us through some of the challenges and some of the systems here that we deal with. They are very complex. And so with that, first is when we're done, my colleagues will talk about just what we learned and then have some ideas for where we go from here. So first off, it's important to understand who we met with. We met locally here with Sharon Byrne from Hands Across Montecito, Gordon Auchincloss from the District Attorney's Office, retired, former interim chief Barney Malekian, Kathleen Boschke from Transition House, Brad Fieldhouse and Emily Koval from CityNet, Terry Mosnisich from the Santa Barbara County Assistant CEO, our current District Attorney John Savernock, Mark Eichenbaum from the City of Houston Mayor's Office for Homeless Initiatives and Houston Coalition for the Homeless, Margaret Willis and some of her staff from the administrator from the Housing and Human Services Division of the City of Santa Monica, and Michael Schellenberger, author of the book San Francisco. And I will say that title is very misleading. I wish he would have chosen a different title because there is a lot of good information in there, but the title does not get to the context of why we felt it was important to reach out to him. So we do have some findings and on best practices. So first is the issue of prioritization by city leadership and staff, the allocation of city general fund resources, partnerships clearly defined and leveraged, and measurable outcomes identified communicated regularly to the public, and prevention. So these are all the major issues that we're dealing with. And so we'll go through kind of all of these and say, how do we improve upon these? How do we improve the public communication? How do we improve the communication between the different agencies, between the cities and the county and even our state and federal partners in this? And there's a lot of nuance in there because of how the funding streams are worked and the restrictions that are on there. And we've learned some different models from our neighboring agencies to South Santa Monica and what they do in Houston as well. Next slide, please. So the recommendation first comes out with emergency shelter and interim housing. When we talk about the need for this is there are a lot of individuals that are on the streets and they need to be able to get to a place right away. And we don't have the ability to put them in permanent supportive housing. And so we need more capacity for shelter, interim housing needs, and just beds to be able to place people to get them stabilized. And the importance of this is once they get stabilized, they become more open to services and getting on the path where they're open and accessible to services that are provided for them. And so next slide, please. And part of this interim housing strategy is the medical, recuperative care, and behavioral treatment beds. So these are important because a lot of the time, individuals are in the hospital, they get discharged, and they go back out onto the streets. And again, there is no permanent supportive housing to put them right away. So we need to have places for them to go so that they can recover from whatever ailments they have, whether they're mental health, physical health, or others. And we've kind of made that transition with the path that Ms. Anderson mentioned earlier, where we have those beds available. But just having that space for people to go that are off the streets to get the mental health and the physical health that they need is a critical aspect, and we need more of those types of beds going forward. And next slide, please. And then we have the daytime navigation centers. The daytime navigation centers are an important part of the puzzle of trying to improve the outcomes for the city, but also for the individuals who are affected by homelessness. During the day, there aren't very many places to go, and some of the places that are available, people don't want to go there they have safety concerns, or they just don't want to be in a place where there's a lot of people, for whatever reasons those may be. And so the ability to have navigation centers where individuals can come in and have just a place to sit down, maybe do laundry, converse with someone who might be a mental health professional, or even just have basic meals or services to just stabilize themselves during the day and get that break from being on the streets is important. And it also builds on the documented success of the neighborhood navigation centers. When we have those available, people come in and they access services, and then that's a point of contact where they build those trusting relationships that can change their mode of thinking and get them more receptive to getting into services, which produces better outcomes from them and addresses a lot of the issues on the streets that are happening. So this is taking a daytime navigation center would be to take the navigation centers that are portable right now a step further. Next slide. So this is one of the major recommendations that we came up with, is housing first or housing ready. And right now with federal and state funding resources, it is the housing first model. And by that, in a general large sense, is that we try to get people into housing where they're at and then provide the supportive services. And that includes those with mental health issues, behavioral and substance abuse issues, and get them into those services. But what we have found in talking with our local experts here from the neighboring agencies, but also in particular with City of Santa Monica and City of Houston, is that having them ready for housing is important, because the outcomes will be much better if they're already in services. And that's where, when we talk about the need for more transitional types of beds, that Dignity Moves provides as a local proof of concept here, they're more stable, so when permanent housing becomes available, they're able to transition into it and have a better outcome. So the unfortunate part is that the federal and state funding resources don't really support those types of funding, those types of transitional housing opportunities. It's more focused on the housing first. So if we have the transitional housing, there is more support services that are available, and it also gets people the stability they need to be able to make informed decisions for their own care. And so we need those. And locally, we have a proof of concept with the Dignity Moves project. We had one in downtown Santa Barbara that has perfectly exemplified why this is important. We've had over 30 individuals coming in there, was the number of beds, and we've had some come in. The impacts to the neighborhood have been very minimal, and we've had some of the most difficult individuals on the streets actually come in and get the services they need there. And the Dignity Moves is expanding. There is the new proposal coming out for the La Posada project out at the former juvenile hall, which will be about 90 beds that have a variety of different needs. And then you also have the Santa Maria project, the Hope project in Santa Maria, which is about 94 beds, and so including medical recuperative beds. So the cities and the cities and the counties are looking at this model as a way to provide the interim housing that we need. The other important part of interim housing that we as a group found is, as you're in the interim housing, and interim is not just 30 days, because the challenges they have is much greater than 30 days. It could be a year, it could be 2, but what it does is it gives them something to work for to get into the permanent supportive housing. That's the goal, is to get them stabilized, get them the services they need, with a goal of working towards finding yourself a place to live permanently that will have the supportive housing you need long term. And that's one of the points that Michael Schellenberger talked about when we met with him, was the need to have a goal for people to work towards, and the interim housing provides that. And the converse of the Dignity Moves project is the Rose Garden Inn, which took place right when we were about starting this, maybe a little bit before. And with the Rose Garden Inn, what we saw was we had some good outcomes for some, but overall there was it was a mixed bag. There wasn't a lot, some of the outcomes weren't what was desired, and there were impacts to the neighborhood. And as a funding model, it just wasn't sustainable. So just putting people into places where we didn't necessarily have the wraparound services that we needed versus the Dignity Moves model, we've learned some lessons there, and the Dignity Moves model is something that I think we can continue to support, and we are looking to support at the city. And so next, the continuum of care. The city should have more input in the continuum of care performance and providers. There is a tension between the city and the county on this. I think we're all working towards the same goals, but there is just differences of opinion at times, and it's a very complex process. And we can talk more about that, my colleagues and Ms. Anderson, when we get to that point. And we are looking for more formal collaboration between the South County cities and jurisdictions to coordinate services, whether through CityNet or our providers or others. So next slide. And another recommendation that this is based out of the City of Houston's model for their continuum of care, is that a third-party facilitator do the continuum of care, because there's a lot of federal and state funding that comes through it. It's a competitive process, and that minimized some of the issues that had come up. So we are interested in exploring that option with the county and having further discussions on that going forward. And then I just wanted to kind of reiterate a couple points, and then I've turned over to my colleagues on here for their thoughts, is that the other issue that comes up quite frequently is enforcement. Where's enforcement of, say, nuisance behaviors or drug use on the streets? The police still do enforce. I want to make that clear. But there are, in the shifts in some of the laws and some of the sentencings that's come forward, it's different than it was even 5 or 10 years ago. And one of the challenges that's come up with enforcement is that if someone used to go through the process, go through the courts, there was an incentive for those who have, say, substance abuse issues to go into treatment through either the Prop 36 or the drug courts or not. But a lot of that incentive has been removed through the court processes, through changes in policy. So we're not getting as many individuals who are accepting of those services. And so where we are is we need to be upfront, and we need to provide these other strategies in the community, such as what the Dignity Moves type of model presents, and getting people stabilized, getting the services they need in interim housing shelters, or even individual beds, so that we have the ability to impact them locally here. And with Santa Monica in particular, one way they were able to do that was through a dedicated funding source, local funding source that they have. With that, because it's a local funding source, they have the ability to put in their own programming. They're not tied to federal and state funding sources where you have to prioritize certain individuals over others. you can really come up with programs that are for the community that they serve, including locals in the community. So there's a lot more flexibility that they have, but at the same time, finding a dedicated funding source would be a challenge to say, but if it is available, it is a very strong tool in focusing on the local population versus if you're taking federal or state dollars. So that's kind of the overview of it, and I'll open it up to my colleagues. Thank you for allowing me to present that.
Thank you. Quick question before we go to your colleagues. Do you know what the Santa Monica budget is, the annual budget?
Do you recall? I don't recall off the top of my head.
Years ago, when we approached this back when I was on council, it was about $10.5 million a year they were doing, but I don't know what they're doing today. And
I think it's more than that, but they have
I would think
a
so, yeah.
dedicated funding source that's
okay,
coming
very
in.
good. Your colleagues, Ms. Snedden or Mr. Jordan, would you guys like to?
Thank you, and thank you, Councilmember Friedman, for presenting. And it's and really to staff work and to our neighboring agencies that we're all in partnership with and trying to figure this out. I just want to reiterate and emphasize how important the need for beds is. The medical recuperative beds, behavioral health treatment beds. We just can't get anywhere without them, and I see that as like the most pressing need. Daytime navigation centers, yes. More transitional beds like Dignity Moves. I think we're all completely in support of that. And then these issues of continuum of care and how we can be coordinated and in partnership more. But my biggest emphasis is that until we have beds for everyone, I just don't see that we can move forward. So just wanted to emphasize that.
Mr. Jordan?
I said it was going to be a conversation, so I get to converse. I don't know if I could say I'm more or less frustrated after a year, because when you know more, you become more frustrated. But I think it is important to note that when we started, I don't really remember the actual timeline, but when we started this, Ms. Anderson was either not here, just here, sort of here, and much of the internal dynamics in our particular internal way have improved dramatically with the addition of her position, and that was clearly something that has been missing in the past. Just to comment briefly on what I see as the issues and the goals, there's nothing I disagree with in this report, but you know, I still liken it to being a minority franchise holder, but one that has the majority of the impacts. And we have zero access to the resources needed. They're controlled by somebody else. And there's both internal silos within our organization to accomplish things, and then there's also the city as a silo as itself looking to regional or state resources, and we're siloed out from that. And I don't know how that's readily fixed, quite frankly, which is why the most appealing thing to me is to be able to control some of our own destiny by having a dedicated funding source for what we see happening here. And I think what's talked about not enough generally on this issue too are the legal constraints we work under. When you can move people, when you can't move people, how you can move people. You know, it's out in public now, the $1 million we're going to spend just defending the sit and lie ordinance, which when it was put in place was, in my opinion, a pretty reasonable halfway point on protecting the rights of the people who needed a place to sit and lie versus the rights of people who needed to move around on sidewalks and keep up the general look and feel of a community. And I think we get sidelined in the public dialogue often because people don't really know the legal constraints. We just get to hear somebody going ballistic that there's a homeless person in their car outside their house and have to spend resources to tell them that's actually legal for a person to be sitting in their car on a public street, that kind of thing. And then overall, I still feel the largest component of the problem is the inability to address mental health and addiction issues. That they are both the most prevalent and public, in-your-face discomfort to community members. They are the worst part of the human the disaster that's out there in the street, and they are by far the least ones that we make gains in. And I don't think all three of those should exist at the same time. That should be, I believe, the number one priority. And obviously, I mean, it might be, but it's probably the toughest priority. I also, over the last 2 years, I probably consumed a good amount of time going to meetings, and I think we're to the point where I'm meeting fatigued out, as are many people. They have just become a recurring sort of same thing, same old thing, and I think it's important to make sure that we actually come away with something that doesn't just continue the bureaucracy or the meeting thing, and we hold our partners to that too. That there has, for my engagement with community members, there has to be something in their mind that is a tangible improvement in the process, other than meetings and money being spent, and either we're not bringing that to them well enough, or it's really just not happening. And then internally for us, ongoing, which I think way better with Barbara on board now, but ongoing too, I think it's important that that we have the best staff level access to council members on what's going on, what's not working, what is working, because again, it consumes a good amount of my dialogue with community members, complaining generally, but to know what's working, what's not working, so we can pass along what is working, and to know what's not working, rather than just continue to put up with that, so that council members can actually affect change in that area, and not just look up in a year, and we've just done a year of what's not working. So I just wrote down 4 or 5 goals for me personally. They kind of just rim at this, but one, I think it's important to have a commitment to compassion first in everything we do. I firmly believe in that, but I've kind of come to the realization over the past year, and the more people we talk to, that you need to put your compassion towards places where there will be positive results. And there needs to be consequences to people who are sucking up all the compassion resources and going nowhere with that. So I'll just use an example. If somebody's going to the Castillo-Carrillo lot for 5 years and having a shower every Tuesday, I think it's well past time that those services get redirected to somebody else who would eventually use those showers as a stepping stone to the next step of whatever that may be, transitional housing, bettering their life. I think we're just not accountable in the resources that we have available, and accountable to what the goal should be. And I think I probably don't explain that well or know what that looks like, but I think there's others who can. We also need to be resolute in what we can do and where we want to put our facilities. I've been part of probably a dozen over the last 13 years as a planning commissioner, or sitting here on a good idea that then gets torpedoed by either some neighborhood discomfort, our inability to explain it well, a lack of resources, and when it's going to go in, maybe it doesn't work well. So we just need to be resolute. We need to find a plan, believe in it, and then together stick up for it. And then I think we also need to hold all our partners in the city that we fund to the same processes and accountability levels. I constantly see examples of where one party's doing one way, one party's doing another way, one party's putting data in somewhere, the other data is going somewhere, somebody's not even doing data. I think data is king these days, and it leads to both knowing when your successes are and having accountability to the resources you're using. And I think internally, we need to responsibly make sure that, that all of our partners are doing that. And then I just wrote down, I already talked about this funding development. I think we need to look for a way to play with resources that we feel are the most beneficial bang for the buck for us locally on the ground, when obviously there are resources available that just don't work for us frequently. And so we need to look for a way to find a steady funding source that we can grow and cultivate and use over time. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
All right, very good. I'm going to have some comments to make, but I see some folks in the audience that may want to comment. Ms. Albers, I know you grabbed a slip to. And I don't know, there's anybody from the general public here, or is everybody pretty much involved in the services? It looks like I've got a pretty familiar crew out there. So if you would like to add on to the ad hoc committee's input, please fill out a slip. Please try to keep it around the 3-minute time. Be careful, Mr. Isaacson. It's dangerous, dangerous place to be. If we can do that, just to, like I said, just to enhance what was set up here by the ad hoc committee. Sellers. Like I said, we'll try to 3-minute-ish, if you would, please.
Super quick. So I'm.
Yeah, thank you.
I'm Kimberly Albers. I serve as the Homelessness Assistance Program Manager with the County of Santa Barbara, and we are just so glad to be your partner. We don't want there to be tension. We want to work as closely as we can with you, and so, you know, we are fully in support of many of the things discussed. I think we want to have a better understanding of when the third-party facilitators discussed. We serve as the collaborative applicant, which means someone has to apply for the funds, and primarily the COC is responsible for the point-in-time count, the housing inventory chart, the homeless management information system, and the coordinated entry system. So there may be confusion about how the funding's coming to the community, but just really appreciate the work of the committee. I think it would be great if there's more work done to include some more stakeholders that would benefit, like maybe the continuum of care, some of the continuum of care board members. So anyway, those just, again, we are here to be your partner on this. We do know much of the funding does come to the county, and so we try and do that through the continuum of care, through the elected leaders forum to address homelessness. And so appreciate so much participation on those boards as well. So just, again, we are here to be your partner, and look forward to working on these recommendations together.
Thank you. And oh, do you have a question for Ms. Albers? Okay, please do. Ms. Ed?
I'm not sure how to interpret is this a workshop type? So is it okay?
It is. We're kind of figuring it
bit.
out as we go here.
And maybe you're not prepared to answer this right now or not, but how can, to the issue of that the city of Santa Barbara is so disproportionately impacted by the number of people, but that we don't receive, to my thinking, we don't receive the same proportionate funding for the issue that's right here on our streets. How can we advocate more for that? I know it's I keep piping up about it here and there a little bit, but how do we formally address that?
I think I didn't realize until today, and maybe when you mentioned it at elected leaders, that that perception was significant. So I think we'd be happy to go back to look at the funding sources that have been, I think when things really changed was when the Homeless Emergency Aid Program came out in 2018. That was the first time the COC received direct funding besides the small allocation that comes annually through HUD. So we'd be happy to go back to maybe heap forward and actually come up with those proportions. I do know that in particularly HEAP, which was the $9 million that came in, we did have a City of Santa Barbara project that did not move forward. You might all remember the Salvation Army project. So that was a large allocation, particularly in the city. But when the project didn't move forward, we had to scramble to meet the very expenditure deadline, so it did go to a county-wide project, actually trying to support behavioral wellness and giving all the cities more street outreach. So definitely want to have that kind of as an asterisk when we put those charts together, but absolutely. I have not done that exact analysis. I know whenever we're in a rank and review panel, we do try and look at the point in time count when we're allocating. We have been putting a lot of dollars at the county into South County projects. You know, we recently purchased the Hedges House of Hope at UC Santa Barbara and Isla Vista, and of course the Dignity Moves project, as well as some other things. So happy to put together that analysis to where you're actually dealing in the actual dollars rather than perceptions.
That would be great. Thank you so much. Because we are good partners, and there is this growing perception,
Yeah,
so appreciate
absolutely.
it.
You have a question for Ms. Albers as well?
We're kind of talking back, we're having a conversation today. So I was actually in that room at the library on the east side for that presentation, one of the poorest presentations I can remember on the subject. But I'm struck by the fact that I'm just trying to remember, but I don't remember another council member being in the room. And so to my point of us being resolute, I think part of the missing link there is us being resolute, but also when it's somebody else's program, whether it's that example or say even the County Planning Commission had a meeting last week on the one out on Hollister, right? News to me till I saw it in the paper. More personally, more than happy to show up anywhere, anytime, and wave at least my position's flag of support for that. And I think that's one of the, just as a small example of kind of like one of the missing links is I think I'm willing to do it. I'll chat it up, get some other people to get who I can to do it. But I think it's important too when it's in the city or it's 100 feet outside the city, like out on Hollister, that you ask for support and get some support. So happy to do that.
And we have that project, the La Posada project, going to the Board of Supervisors for the actual ground lease on Tuesday, May 16th. Just coming Tuesday, so would love to have voices of support in the room.
Don't go away. Mr. Friedman's got a question.
Thank you for being here today, Ms. Albers. I just wanted to clarify in case it wasn't clear from the presentation that we're not recommending at this point that there be an independent third party. We just saw that the Houston model had some advantages, and we want to explore what options are out there. In particular, how it goes into the streams of funding for the money that comes in for the county, for the cities to come in, and that's the part that was intriguing to us. And we just want to look at what are the options. Is there something that could be applicable here or not? So I just wanted to clarify that we're not making the recommendation to go forward with that. It's just something that we saw that we want more information on.
And anytime you feel like we aren't acting as a third party or that there's conflict, I think Ms. Anderson shared something with me right before the meeting today that I wasn't aware of. We want to address that and want to take any of your concerns into play. So appreciate that dialogue.
Well, and just to chime in, so the difference between now and before was we do have Ms. Anderson. We have a tip of the spear. Now, of all the closet full of hats we've given her to wear, this is probably the most important one because as the transient nature of who sits in these seats over the years, if we have one presence from the administration, and the main goal, at least in my mind, was to have that liaison with the county because we've always functioned as cats and dogs, and it's been unfortunate over the years I've been around that we don't have more collaboration. That is, when Ms. Bjork came up with that position, that was really one of the primary goals was to have this kind of relationship, and I'm glad to hear your palms up look toward us because we definitely need to partner up. There's a tremendous amount of resources that go into a relatively small amount of individuals, and this ad hoc committee, I think, has illustrated the way I feel too, is what we haven't found the effective mechanism, tools, or techniques yet. And it can't just be we're going to wait till we have housing, because obviously that's a goal that's nice, but is not attainable and probably not the right approach. So I appreciate your statements today, and like I said, Ms. Anderson really is our key to changing the dynamic of the way, at least the way the city functions in this. So.
Well, we're meeting monthly, but maybe we need to do that more frequently and maybe just have that written note so that everyone's aware.
Well, and for us too, because we can filter in, and she knows I'm in her office almost every day. Isn't that right, Barbara? but we have an ability to communicate our ideas, frustrations, and compliments through her to you. So that's, it makes it more efficient for us rather than having us, like Mr. Jordan said, we'll show up, but what's better is having our tip of the spear there, so.
And maybe a last comment that made me, what you said, Mayor, made me think of is in response to the behavioral health comment, I think that was by Councilmember Jordan, just that the county did invest their ARPA dollars, right, not state or federal funding, but their own ARPA dollars to greatly expand the behavioral health team that was on the streets. And we have not been able to fully staff that team now for over a year and a half. So you're not feeling the impact, not because we didn't dedicate the resources, but because we couldn't get the bodies yet. So still recruiting in those areas. So just wanted to, it all plays into it, right? Sometimes we can't recruit because we don't have an affordable housing for employees to come either. So just wanted what you said
Thank you.
made me think of that.
All right, thank you very much. Mr. Uribe, actually, you changed your name since I've last addressed you. Mr. Uribe, is it, how do you pronounce your new last name?
It's Uribe Mutal. I actually kept the Uribe because that's what most people know me by.
Okay.
I
so
just
know
kept the
you by
Mutal when I had kids. I was like, wanted to match them.
Okay.
my husband was a little regretful that I didn't do it sooner, like 5 years sooner. Good afternoon, or good morning. I am from this area. I grew up here, and so I've lived in Goleta, I've lived in Santa Barbara, I've lived in Carpinteria. Currently, I'm program manager down at the city of Carpinteria, and we are a small city, a staff of 40, and so I wear many hats, and amongst one of them, I do the role of that Barbara does here. I do in Carpinteria. So I wanted to address a few things. One is I wanted to let you know that the city of Carpinteria is really interested in collaboration, and the county does a lot of work, and they support the city as much as the cities, I think, as much as they can. But it's a big county, and it's for them, I think it's a small staff as well. And so I think it's important for us to, as a South Coast, organize and our resources and our measurements of success and goals in order to make meaningful improvements. I think we need to, I know Barbara's very on board with collaborating. Sharon Byrne down in Montecito area is very much in favor of collaborating. Chuck Flax, of Goleta, is committing money and staff to this. So I think this is an important issue, and we need to be able to step up and do what we can on our end together without necessarily having to, I don't want to say rely on the county, but they're doing a lot. And so I think it's time for us to be able to do stuff together as well. And City of Carpinteria has kind of had a little bit of the same thoughts about representation on the Continuum of Care board. And yeah, so just wanted to let you know that we're up for any ways that we can collaborate. And we've got a small staff, and we actually, our point in time count ends up always being around somewhere between 20 and 30. But we are, thanks to kind of boilerplate ordinances that the county has provided us, we did start a safe parking program, and we have, after the elected leaders program, where you brought the Dignity Moves folks, we have had meetings with them and are trying to find a site. So whatever ways we can collaborate, we're available.
Very good. Thank you very much. Well, as far as my comments to the ad hoc committee, which I appreciate and did a nice job, and working with Ms. Anderson, we do a lot of as much community presence as possible. We go out with PD, we go out with many of you that are in this room, walked West Side, East Side, State Street, Waterfront, and North Side. And partially to find out exactly what different merchants and residents are experiencing, and partially to be a visible presence that we are out there looking, engaged, trying to do these things. One thing I just got done arresting a group down at the Cabrillo Arts Center this morning, and whatever impacts we are making, which I see as positive, and I just put out my little newsletter to my mailing list, and I got a little feedback back, is that people don't necessarily perceive the progress because what they see out there, probably the most service resistant is the one that we still have out there. Dignity Moves was a very, very positive effect, super well managed by Good Sam. I was a cynic. I didn't think it was a good idea, a good place, and I've certainly changed my mind since I've seen the performance that it's been fabulously run. But I think it's really important as we focus on people's rights and people's civil liberties and all that, is that we also have to recognize we are responsible for the rights of the entire community as well. It's not just this one relatively small group, you know, pretty much almost less than a percentage of our city population anyway. And that those rights have to be respected in terms of the ability to use quietly and efficiently property, parks, streets, sidewalk, and all that. We have to balance that out because we tend to focus, and Mr. Jordan mentioned compassion, which I think this community has in spades. I don't think there's a shortage of compassion anywhere, but we've got to, those practical applications. Prop 47 didn't help. It may had good intentions, but we've put another population on the street that ends up counting into our homeless population, comes out with sometimes substance issues, criminal issues or whatever, and with no skills or anything else besides their newly found freedom. So, and it makes it also hard too when we see blatant open substance use on the street. We can't do anything beside it. We can't. Arresting is not obviously the answer in processing, but it hasn't helped the situation. I think as we get to our clients out there, the people that we're trying to deal with, I think it's important that we have more than just a one-way street in terms of our charitable and compassionate use. We have to also, every individual is trying to recover needs to be able to participate in their own success on some level. And when they can't, that's when I would love to have the legal ability to direct them, compel them into at least initial services or triage. But when you get somebody who can have ownership in their own success, their own improvement, and maybe even eventually addiction recovery, those are the ones that are going to be the long-term success stories going forward. Santa Monica, Eric mentioned, spends a lot of money. Like I said, last time I looked when I was on council, it was about $10.5 million. I'm sure it's much far greater than that. Yeah, Kim said, oh, yeah, yeah, it is bigger. And they're in the middle of hell right now. They are really having a bloom down there. And even though they've dedicated a lot of resources, a lot of enforcement and ordinance-wise, it's a really tough situation down there. The greater LA area in general, we're actually pretty fortunate we have as much of a handle on it as we do here. And a lot of it is due to the efforts of a lot of the folks in the room. So once again, I think I echo most of what the ad hoc committee came up with. And I do appreciate the ongoing efforts, and I really do try to coordinate at least my questions, my criticisms, and my desires through Ms. Anderson, because I think that is why she's here, and I think why we are going to be feeling more and more success as we go forward with the program that we do have. So that's all I got. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for public comment, and appreciate City of Carpinteria coming up, and definitely want to collaborate more on the South County. Recognize that. I do want to emphasize, the mayor mentioned the regional action plans that we have, both on Zoom, where a lot of us are coming together, a lot of the providers, service providers, and others, including law enforcement as well on there, and seeing what we're seeing and how to address it, and the site visits throughout the city where we do those walks with all the different entities and our partner agencies have been very productive in terms of understanding the challenges in specific neighborhoods, and we've been able to respond in appropriate manners that address the public health and safety concerns that the public in the neighborhood has, but also for the individuals is trying to help get them on the right track as well. And I also want to just put on the record that we did reach out to the Public Defender's Office, but we were not able to coordinate our schedules in time for this meeting. So I just want to let everybody know, yes, we did connect with the district attorney, but we also did reach out to the public defender as well. There wasn't an oversight there. So what I appreciate the comments of my fellow colleagues in the council, and where I think this should go is, this is an ad hoc committee, and we were out to research and come up with the information and our best thoughts about where we go from here. And at this point, I think it would be helpful to give some direction to staff to just write up like an executive summary of everything we've talked about today, the research that we've had, and then send our findings and recommendations to all the cities in the county, the other 7 cities, the county board of supervisors, and then as well send that to our state senator, state assembly member, as well as our Congress member, so they're aware of the work that we've done. And also, being that one of the larger issues is the housing ready versus the housing first, and that's tied into state and federal policies, is to also send that the information that we've gathered to the California League of Cities, because I think they would find it useful from other cities, and that might be an opportunity for us to continue to engage and learn what other cities throughout the state are dealing. So I think that would be our appropriate next step.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Nedden?
Yeah, I think, I don't know if we want to have more of a discussion too on, I mean, I think that it's excellent writing up the executive summary and bringing that to full council. Is this agendized as a council meeting where action can be taken, or it's not? Okay, so it's just a discussion of, because I think some of the findings from individual meetings, my computer's out of battery, so I'm trying to read it on my phone, all my notes from our individual meetings too, is just how do we get these beds? I mean, the number we had at some point was, we need 40 beds or 75 beds. Can you remind us, what is the number that we need so everybody has a bed?
And Ms. Stotts, can I actually have you come up, because I know you just did the analysis for the housing element update specific to shelter bed needs in the city of Santa Barbara.
Ms. Stotts?
Hi. Is it on? Can you hear me? So, yeah, as Ms. Anderson said, I did recently do an emergency bed assessment for our housing element. And following state guidance, we have determined that based on 2023 point-in-time data, it is 226 additional emergency shelter beds.
I'm sorry, what was that number again, please?
226.
Thank you.
In the city?
In the city.
Okay. And I guess that's where I want the conversation or discussion to be, is how would we get there? So I think we've identified the problem, we've identified best practices, we have some recommendations, but how do we get there to these 226, or even agreeing on that would be, of these recommendations, the number one priority? To me, that's the number one priority. I don't know, discussion-wise, where we are.
I think that fits in exactly with the issue of the housing ready versus the housing first, because we're not going to get people to a point where they're housing ready if we don't have those beds to get them off the streets. So that is in line with the number one recommendation. I think that is where we need to go on it. So staff's hearing me. Again, we can't give direction. We can talk about it, and they can take that feedback.
Well, we're the ad hoc too, we could prioritize. I mean, we're the majority of council here. Couldn't we set priority of which?
I think, Eric, excuse me, I think Mr. Friedman's suggestion of having an executive summary by Ms. Anderson
Yes,
would be...
yes, and I want to address to you that the county's initiative to fund from multiple sources the creation of interim housing beds also addresses some of those emergency sheltering needs.
Mm-hmm.
So, Ms. Albers, I'm not sure if you want to clarify the recent initiatives and where those funding sources are and how they've been allocated.
I just didn't want to miss, oh, did I do this again? No. Right now, the state has an application open that's over the counter that can fund permanent or interim housing beds. It's called Home Key. You probably have heard of it. And we haven't. I think all of us, our best efforts, everyone in this room, plus probably 100 more people, have been trying to identify sites, because it is one of the only sources that pays almost all of the development costs as well as operations costs. We think it might be the last round because of the state, the state budget situation. So, the over-the-counter started on April 24th, so we're certainly worried about timing as we come up with projects, but we have really struggled to come up with another site. But the funding, we do believe, is there if we could get something in for Home Key quickly.
Thank you. And then I guess my other priority would be, I forget in which presentation that there was all this funding for behavioral health treatment beds. And was it Carpinteria? I really wish I had my notes with me, but yeah.
I can help with that one. Sorry, I should have started that. So there's behavioral health bridge housing, BHBH,
Yes.
coming through the Department of Healthcare Services, as well as funding for residential for folks who are incompetent to stand trial. The BHBH pot is about $9 million. The incompetent to stand trial would be like a jail diversion program for those that have behavioral health issues. Is also another $9 million. Same problems, identifying the sites, right, to utilize those dollars. We are going to, buy beds, right, at some existing facilities for those, but still trying to identify sites for those as well. And those applications come out from the state, and we have to have projects within 4 to 6 weeks. And then I did want to clarify, just make sure that I think sometimes when we're thinking of housing first, we think of that as like just people going into permanent housing, but the Dignity Moves project on Santa Barbara Street is absolutely a housing first project. It is funded with Housing First dollars. It has to comply with Housing First as almost everything we do. And we would, if we went too far, again, I think really understanding Housing First, and I think the committee actually made making sure that there's adequate supportive services when we're using a Housing First approach, right, is the main piece. But I just wanted to make sure that there's not misunderstanding that those projects that you're citing as successes are absolutely Housing First projects.
Well, I think the confusion too comes when we talk about housing versus bridge housing, and the bridge housing, of course, with the services and the enhanced navigation we're currently trying to get up and running, and we'll, of course, at the Virtual Cordero Center later on. Those will be big keys to all of these things. So we're moving in, I think, the right direction. But I do think that it does take a slightly different mindset that we've had over these past decades, because how many 10-year plans to end chronic homelessness have we been through, and how successful we've been, and what we've done is kind of maintain status quo numerically. So we're looking for that progress, and I'm saying not from the folks in this room only, but for the entire community. The entire community's got to feel like we're making progress. And Dignity Moves is a great example, because now that we've done it, and to my mind it's been very successful, that helps the perception to go to the next project. If that had been what I predicted it was going to be, that'd be it. But it's been good. So now we have that stepping stone, which is fabulous.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the project on Santa Barbara is what is paving the path, right, for the Santa Maria and the La Posada project. So absolutely. And I think the community, what's different maybe about the community action plan to address homelessness now that this city has adopted as well, is that we are tracking progress daily. It's not on the shelf. We do have funding to enact the priorities of the plan, and so that's why we're able to show, over 400 permanent housing units created, over 150 or so now temporary units. So we are able to really chart that progress of the community, but sounds like that word isn't getting out.
Right. Like I said, a lot of it's the nomenclature. Ms. Sten, you had some.
Yeah, that was, so the incompetent to stand trial, and that was something that we learned when we met with the district attorney, is this issue where someone can commit a violent crime, even be incompetent to stand trial, receivership doesn't accept it, and then they're right back on the street again, someone who is known to have committed a violent crime. And so I'm wondering, there's housing for incompetent to stand trial, or how? You mentioned that as a jail diversion, and that's something new to me. And so, are you saying like if we had a location for this, that we could receive funding?
Yeah, I'm definitely not an expert, so we'll definitely want to bring in the public defender and behavioral wellness to talk about that. But yes, the state recently put out funding for a residential enhanced services model for those that would be safe in a community-based model while they're incompetent to stand trial. So that's a new initiative of the state that goes along with some of the things you've been hearing about care court and mental health, state mental health system reform. So those pieces, right, are definitely worth their own meeting, probably. Huge initiatives by the state that are just in process, but they are as similar to what happened with homelessness, right? They're putting out the money while we're all still learning, and they're still going through reform bills.
Thank you. And I guess this is for the committee. That was a really enlightening conversation with the district attorney when we learned. I mean, it sounds like this wouldn't even address that because it would be, people would be safe to live in communal.
Well, that's why I'm so glad to see you guys including Gordon Auchincloss in that, in your discussions, because Gordon and I talk a lot about this stuff, and he eats this stuff for breakfast every day. And he's got also the legal background and, you know, the criminal background as well as the compassionate housing background. So he's a big key as a retiree, somebody who's got the expertise, but, you know, doesn't have to mind his P's and Q's. He can move forward with things that are good. So he's a good addition to your group.
As is the district attorney, who,
Yeah.
and then we discussed possibly having
Public defenders.
joint with the city collaboration. And that was something that, I mean, maybe we would discuss further and not in these formal, but there was a lot that came out of that conversation that on the legal end of it that maybe didn't wind up in the presentation, but maybe could be touched on in the executive summary, because a lot of, as you're saying, Mr. Mayor, about our hands being tied, in some ways they are, but in some ways we can untie them a little bit. And I think
be nice.
that's worth talking about.
Very good. Mr. Jordan.
Just nuts and bolts. I didn't hear you say this, so if you did, I apologize, but on that letter, I think we should also copy all our partners that are in the room and not in the room, because most of them, you know, treat the problem. They should also line up and be supportive of the cure. So we're talking, you know, CityNet and SB Act, obviously. Rob Fredericks is sitting in the back of the room. Doctors Without Walls, the Showers people, all those, and that whole list of CDBG, the entities that we prioritized housing in those allocations too, or homelessness in those allocations too. You know, I think they should all be on that page with us too, know where we're going and be ready to support that.
Well, I agree with that. I think one of the purposes is to distill this down into some kind of executive summary like we talked about before. And that may or may not want to generate an agenda item in the future for council. But then that communication piece with all our partner agencies may either be that or maybe something even separate that just another job we give to Ms. Anderson, because Lord knows she's got nothing to do over there. But it is important, like you said, Micah, to have all our partners involved, especially with an expertise which is a little fungible, frankly. I mean, it's what's working, what's not working. The whole nation's asking these questions. And it's not just California and our laws, it's everywhere in the country. And so it's important that we get as much collaboration from as many different agencies, legal, medical, like the group we were with yesterday with the Fighting Back. And there's a lot of expertise there in the hospitals that deal with, certainly with substances and uses and, harm reduction, those kind of things that are going to be an important factor in all this stuff going forward. So. Very good. Sid.
Thank you. So will the executive summary give specific recommendations and priorities, or do we discuss that here? I'm just concerned it goes to an executive summary and then something like, identifying sites so that we could get these funds, these BHBH funds or for beds, like, an actionable item.
Well, once again, I think giving it to Ms. Anderson to digest what we've talked about here today and putting it in a form like an executive summary, and then we can determine if two of us want to put it on a future agenda. Okay. But what we don't want to do is just have an agenda item where it's just this is an open discussion, which is great. But if we're going to have an agenda item, let's have actionable steps.
That's what I was wondering when we get to that
So
point.
I don't think we're there yet today, but I mean, if Ms. Anderson comes up with something along those lines, or some of our partners as well that are out there, would be good. Ms. Harley, you had a...
Thank you, Mayor Ross. I just wanted to clarify that, yes, since this is a discussion today, this is certainly all information that's under the purview of our homelessness work. And so distilling that down into something that is digestible and then can be brought forward for further discussion and action is what we'll do. So that's not today, though. Thank you.
All right, very good. Are there any further comments from my colleagues?
Mr. I just really, again, want to thank our staff and my colleagues. It was a very in-depth, and there's a lot more to this. We're trying to distill over a year of work in multiple hours of meetings and discussions. And there are positive steps, as we've heard today, that have been taken, and I think we are in a better place where we have communication with our partners, including the nonprofits, not just the government agencies, but others as well, and the non-government agencies. So I'm looking forward to this executive summary, and then looking at what we can do locally, but also being, at the forefront of, the housing-ready discussion, and seeing how that works with transitional beds and respite beds as well. So just thank you to everyone for this opportunity, and I really learned a lot.
Yeah, and it's just to follow up on that too. As we have tangible action steps or something like the 226 beds and whatever we're doing, we may also be able to attract some private philanthropy as well. But the first thing we're going to need is a real cogent plan, something that's not just, let's throw some money out and see what happens. Let's have a plan going forward, and a site and a deal and something ready to go. We're just short of this much funding, and we may find some angels out there, so that would be good. All right, well, unless there's anything else, Ms. Anderson, anything, or Mr. Gutierrez, are you road weary?
A little bit. I want to apologize. My flight was delayed till this morning. Apparently, there's something at the airport that can't deal with fog, so they had to cancel the flight last night.
All right, very good, thanks. You and Ms. Harmon are our jet-setting colleagues here on the council. And with that, I believe we are adjourned unless, that's it? Okay. Thank you all very much. Eli?